I think most of you know Ava Perry, the director of our women's ministry, been a tremendous gift to us. And each year, the elders and myself invite Ava to speak to our body. She's got a message that not only applies to women, but applies to men. So guys, don't kind of tune us, oh, this is Mother's Day for the ladies. This is a message for everybody. And Ava, thank you for your ministry here to our women, to our staff, to our people, to me. And God bless you today, sister. And this is her husband, Mark, for those who don't know him. And God bless you, Ava.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to join in honoring my sisters who have lived their life as a mom. I remember when I was a young mom, what was going through my mind was, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Someone give me some encouragement. Am I doing this right? And that's still a little bit in my mind and in my heart. Lord, am I doing this right? So blessings to you. And I want to just be honest with you. My heart breaks as well for women who have not been moms. There are many women who are not even here today because it's Mother's Day. So I pray that their gaze would turn to Christ by the power of the Spirit, because there's a lot of pain and affliction going on in our reality, and that is true. So have you ever felt like a nobody? Have you ever had feelings of being invisible? Would you walk with me through the reality and the pain of Hagar, who is the servant of Abram and Sarah? We know them as Sarah and Abraham. So here's a little bit about Sarah's life. Sarah was Abram's wife, and she was barren. Sarah was not pregnant, and she was in her older years in this passage in Genesis. So the third area about Sarah is that she had a servant named Hagar. But I want to stop for a minute, and if we have the passage in Genesis 16, 1 through 15, let's read that together as a congregation, and then I'll walk through a little bit of this passage. I wanted you to see it, though. Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maid whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, now behold, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. After Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar, the Egyptian, her maid, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. He went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her sight. And Sarai said to Abram, may the wrong done to me be upon you. I gave my maid into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, behold, your maid is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. So Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. He said, Hagar, Sarah's maid, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress, Sarai. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit yourself to her authority. Moreover, the angel of the Lord said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, Behold, you are with child, and you will bear a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has given heed to your affliction. Thereafter, Hagar used another name to refer to the Lord, who had spoken to her. She said, You are the God who sees me. She also said, Have I truly seen the one who sees me? So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, who Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. So the cultural pressure of those ancient days was that if a woman could not become pregnant, if she was barren, if she was not able to have children in that ancient culture, she was considered a failure. She was considered one who's just not successful, maybe even insignificant, maybe even worthless in that ancient culture. So Sarah was in her older years. She became impatient. She wanted this to happen now in terms of the pregnancy. She said to her husband, she wanted to help God out. She says, Look, the Lord has prevented me from having children. So here's the plan. Please have relations with my servant Hagar. Perhaps I will obtain children through her. Now, that might have been legally acceptable in that culture, but not sanctioned by God. God never told Abram that a child of theirs would be born from Sarah's servant Hagar. So Abram did what Sarah wanted him to do. He listened to his wife, who had a human plan. So Abram's wife, Sarah, took Hagar, and she gave Hagar to Abram to have relations. So they had relations. Hagar became pregnant. And when Hagar knew she was pregnant, she despised Sarah. Maybe Hagar felt that she had the upper hand. She had Abram's child, and Sarah did not. Now, although Sarai, devised this plan, she began to blame her husband for how it was turning out. She says, I was wronged for my servant to despise me. I was wronged, but you are going to have to pay for it. My servant despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me, Abram. So Abram said, hey, look, she, your servant, is in your hands. Do with her whatever you want to do. So can you imagine Hagar, the servant, in the hands of Sarai? Sarai was, she's livid. My servant despises me. So Sarai was harshly treating Hagar. Can you imagine Hagar at the hands of Sarah with the pain, with the abuse, with the suffering, with the oppression, with the oppression? Stop, Sarah, stop. The servant Hagar. At some point, she ran into the wilderness. She was a servant girl, rejected by her mistress. She was in the wilderness. Can you picture her? She had no will of her own. Sarai, remember, she took Hagar and she gave him to Abram. So Hagar is running through the wilderness with no will of her own, no voice of her own, no honor of her own. Who's going to ask Hagar any questions? Who's going to listen to Hagar's answers without interrupting her? A servant girl, invisible. A servant girl without honor. A servant girl, a nobody running through the wilderness. Who will rescue her? Who will provide for Hagar? Who will protect Hagar in her personal wilderness? Who will see Hagar? So I wonder if Hagar felt trapped by her circumstances, trapped by the powerful people in her life, trapped by her desert times. The desert for Hagar, it's lonely. The desert is hot. Where will Hagar go? And what will she do? She's pregnant in the desert. Hagar has a divided gaze. She's looking back to where she came from, and she's looking forward in the desert. What will happen to Hagar? Hagar's desert is a lonely place, hot, lifeless, except there's a spring of water. On the way to Egypt, there's a spring of water, and this is where Hagar had an encounter with one who is eternal, with one who has eternal eyes, who had met Hagar at the spring of water. Hagar encountered the pre-incarnate Christ. Church, it was Christ himself in her wilderness. It was Christ himself who met her at the spring of water in her desert on her way towards Egypt. The pre-incarnate Jesus Christ stepped into Hagar's reality. The eternal one, the one who saw her with eternal eyes. Truth be told, he was already in her desert before she got there. The Lord saw Hagar, this servant, this nobody, this woman who was so mistreated, with no will, no honor, no voice. Christ spoke to her. He spoke to a woman in the ancient days. And not only that, he called her by her name. He said, Hagar, servant of Sarah. He saw that she was a servant of Sarah. That means Jesus Christ saw her plight as a servant. Jesus Christ saw her flight through the desert. And not only that, he was asking her questions. This nobody, this invisible woman, he asked her questions. He said, Hagar, where have you come from? And where are you going? Now, personally, those questions sounds like a question that Pastor Gary will often ask us and you, what's going on in your world? Between her plight and her flight, Hagar, what's happening in your world? Because see, Hagar is in a lifer. A lifer are circumstances that go on and on and on and on, sometimes with no end in sight. So Hagar says, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. Now I'm thinking about those questions. The Lord spoke to her in her desert times. I'm thinking about those questions. And it was not so the Lord could be informed. He wasn't asking her questions so he could assess the situation, so that he could be informed. What a wonderful invitation he gave to Hagar in her desert times to reveal, to manifest to him her deepest pain of a personal desert. She was running through the desert, but this was her personal desert, her lonely desert, and she was invited to reveal to him her personal pain. So she says, I am running from my mistress, Sarah. How honoring that the Lord is in the midst, in the middle of Hagar's desert. How honoring that he arranged face to face to meet a servant girl, a nobody, invisible to people. How honoring that he invites Hagar to tell him about what's in between the plight and the flight. How honoring it is that he's in her desert and he puts an invitation out. What's going on? Where have you come from? Where are you going? He invites her to reveal her deepest pain in her desert. So by the spring, he gives her a shepherding direction. You know how he does? We're in the desert, we're in flight, and Christ gives Hagar a different direction. He has Hagar return to her plight, return to her most difficult circumstance, return to what she ran from. That was her plight. To the flight, he's saying, Hagar, don't keep going towards Egypt. Turn around, and go back to your difficult circumstance. Is right. But Hagar is not just returning to her difficulty alone. She's not just going back by herself. Hagar has an awareness that God met her, that God called her by name, that the Lord Jesus Christ was asking questions of her. Hagar was returning with an awareness that the Lord sees me. There's an awareness there. She can return back because there's an awareness that God sees her. Hagar has an awareness that he sees her, but also she is returning back to the difficult circumstances that she's involved with. She is returning back because the presence of the Lord surrounds her. She can go back because she's in the midst of his presence, in the midst of her desert. The Lord surrounds her. She's going back in the presence of the Lord. It reminds me of Psalm 125, verse 2. It says, just as the mountains surround Jerusalem, So the Lord surrounds his people now and forever. She's going back with the Lord surrounding her. She's not going back alone. She has an awareness that God sees her. She has an awareness that she is in the presence of the Lord. He's going back with her. He's going back before her. He's going back surrounding her. She can go back. Hagar returns to her plight from her flight with an eternal promise that he gave her. How honoring it is to hear eternal promises from the mouth of the Lord. He's with her there. His promise was this: Hagar, I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too numerous to count. Hagar had a promise from the Lord that her future would be cared for. Therefore, Hagar could return to her most difficult circumstance with hope, with the God of hope. And wait, that's not it. That's not all. He says furthermore. He sees her furthermore. Hagar, you are now pregnant. And you are going to have a son. And you are to call his name Ishmael. For the Lord has heard your painful groans. Ishmael means the Lord hears. That he hears. So the Lord sees. It's a church, it's an intimate seeing. It's an intimate, down deep to the soul seeing. It's not for information, but it's for revelation. He, eternal God with eternal eyes, sees Hagar. Sees her affliction, sees her pain, sees her oppression, sees her rejection. He is not unaware. Hagar. He sees. That's why she can return. If she returned by herself, hopeless. But she's returning with a God who sees. In the desert, we were asking, who will provide for her? Who will protect her? Who will rescue Hagar? The Lord himself. So verse 13, I think this is the heart of the text. So Hagar named the Lord who spoke to her. She named him. You are the God who sees me, she said. Here I have seen the one who sees me. What an awareness, what a knowledge, what a conviction. Lord, you see me. Lord, I have seen you. So Hagar can return to her most difficult circumstance because the Lord himself has lifted her gaze. Oftentimes in the desert times, in the wilderness, like Hagar, no honor, no will. Who sees me? Oftentimes our eyes are right there in the desert. But with the presence of the Lord and with the promises that he gave Hagar and with the surrounding awareness that she is having, that he is the God who sees, Hagar's gaze is lifted towards the Lord. We cannot lift our own gaze. Hagar knew the wilderness, the desert, the issues, the problems, the rejection. It was too much for Hagar. She had to get out of there. She had to run from the presence of Sarah. But honoring that the Lord lifts Hagar's gaze to himself. That's why she could say, you are the God who sees me. In her desert times, you see me. Returning back to that most difficult time, pregnant, you see me. Returning back to the ancient culture and to Sarah, you know what he said? He said, not only return, Hagar, but submit yourself. Yield yourself. And I'm thinking, she's just not yielding herself to Sarai's authority. When she's yielding, going back, listening to the Lord, when she's going back, she's yielding to a bigger one, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. She's yielding to him. Sarah is short-sighted, but the big picture, Hagar is yielding to the hands and the presence of the one who sees her. That's why she could go back. So, church, what's going on in your world? Not as a church, not as a congregation, individually. What's going on in your world, in your life? Are you running through hot, long, lonely, and uncertain desert times? Only you would know that in your soul. The Lord sees you in your plight. The Lord sees you in your flight. He's calling your name. It's true. It's true. It's not a myth or a fairy tale. It's true. He's calling your name in the middle of your desert times. We all have those seasons. He's inside of your personal desert, seeing and hearing your painful groans, your painful afflictions, your painful trial and trouble and rejection and feeling like a nobody sometimes, feeling invisible. He's there with you. So Hagar's life story is not unlike ours. And here is a very important point. He's the God of one. Don't forget that. When you're returning back today to your difficult circumstance, or tomorrow to an area that you cannot be certain of, he's the God of one. He attends to the one. He loves the one. He speaks your name to you because he sees you. He sees you. Some here have been in your waiting room an awful long time. And it takes a whole lot of work sometimes to have the happy face on in the atrium. God sees you. Some of you have actually experienced being mistreated as an invisible nobody. Through the happy face here at church, I want to remind you that he sees you. He sees you, not as a big congregation, but as you and you and you. You can return to your most difficult circumstance today. Some of you will be getting in your car after you get through that atrium with a smile, and some of you are in circumstances that are hot. And once in a while, I see you walking real fast. Don't, get to the car, get to the car. Don't talk, get to the car. He's in that car with you. He's in the car with you as you return today to your most difficult circumstance that you're uncertain about, that you don't know the future of. God sees you. He sees you. And you, like Hagar, are not returning alone. Brothers and sisters, you're returning. You're returning instead of fleeing. When we flee and keep fleeing and keep fleeing, maybe we need to be reminded of a God who sees so you can return to your most difficult desert hot times. You can do this with an awareness that the Lord sees me. You can return today and tomorrow to your most difficult circumstances that have not changed in years with biblical promises. The promises of the scriptures are the voice of God. They come from his mouth to you. Because he's not here, visible, incarnate. So the scriptures speak to you. Don't ignore the scriptures. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, wonderful places to start in the scriptures, asking one question, a little bit at a time, every day, asking, Lord, show me who you are. Show me, Lord. Help me to see you. You see me. And when the Lord is gazing on you and he is lifting your gaze to him, he's gazing, you're gazing. You return to your plight with him. That's called intimacy. Intimacy. His gaze and your gaze. Oh, listen to one of his promises. Isaiah 43, 1 and 2. I'm going to back that up. Isaiah 41:10. Do not fear. He says, this is the Lord. I'm with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, he says. Surely I will help you. Surely I will uphold you with my right hand of righteousness. You can return to your most difficult circumstances, allowing Jesus to turn your gaze and to turn your gaze through the scriptures and to turn your gaze through godly companions. We need to be alone with the Lord, and we need people in our lives. We need both. And with that, the Lord uses those times to turn our gaze towards him. So when he's saying, return to your circumstance, return to the difficulty, you know he is with you. So you're going back through that door again where you never thought you would go back in. And here's the Lord. Come on, I'm with you. Come on, we're going back. Do not fear. I have redeemed you. I have called you by your name, and you are mine. Oh, yeah, you are mine. You don't belong to the desert. You don't belong to the devil. You don't belong to other people. You are mine. So when you pass through the waters, they're not going to overflow you. And through the rivers, they're not going to overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you won't be scorched. Come on, come over here. We're going back. Come on. When you walk through the fire, you won't be scorched. Neither will the flame burn you. why is that? Because he sees you individually. Only me. He sees you. And why is that? You and I can return today. In a few minutes, some of you are getting in your cars and going back. You got some relief here, but you're going back to your difficult desert times. He sees you. He sees you. He sees you. He sees you. And because the Lord himself sees you and sees me, we can endure our desert times. We need him. We can persevere because he strengthens us. Surely he will help us. Surely he will uphold us with his right hand of righteousness. He promised. He promised. Doesn't mean that all is well and everything is going to go away and no more issues, no more problems, no more afflictions. No, that's not what it means, and that's not what we're saying. No name it, claim it, nothing. We're saying he's with you and it matters. He sees you and it matters. He's got you. He's got you. He's got you. He's got you. And he sees you. Come on. Come on. We can do this. Here's my word. Here's my promise. Here's my promise. Here's my word. You can endure only because of the presence of the Lord with you. Only. It's not through your works, not through being good, not through hoping, but it's through returning and yielding yourself to the hand of the Lord. So as the worship team comes now, we're going to worship the God who sees.